Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko rangitoto te maunga, ko moana nui a kiwa te moana, no tamaki makaurau ahau. Ko Ngāti Whātua te iwi, ko Prince, tōku kaitiaki. Ko Victoria Kelly, tōku ingoa. I could not be more delighted to welcome you here to hear Susan Rogers speak to you about her work. When you read about Susan Rogers, you immediately come across the name Prince. And I don't know, anybody in this room who knows me knows that I am a bit of a Prince fan. Just a bit. And so you can imagine that for me this is enormous. I am standing here next to a hero of mine and somebody who has worked with a hero of mine. But the amazing thing about Susan is that she is so many things, and so many things beyond and above the people that she's worked with, but actually a kind of a much greater whole around all of those things. Something that you said when we were talking over the past few days was that you don't really know great until you see great. And this is great. And this is something that we have been, there's been a group of us ensconced at Roundhead Studios, a group of women, female identifying and non-binary people gathered upon Roundhead creating music together, writing songs every day, creating music, learning about engineering, learning about production, learning about each other, and learning about what it's like to actually find yourself in a space where you're not in the minority, which is kind of amazing. And it has been like rain falling onto parched earth, I think, be a way to say that on behalf of everybody, if I may be so bold. Because, you know, art is about art. It's not about gender. It shouldn't be about gender. But there's something nice about working with people that look like you, you know, collaborating with people that resonate on the same level that you resonate on, over and above the artistic resonance that you can share with anybody. Susan has spoken to us on so many different levels about so many different subjects. Yes, we've had plenty of amazing stories about Prince, just sprinkled into the conversation like tiny purple diamonds. But then we've heard about production. You know, now I can say I've been recorded by Susan Rogers, by the way. Myself and Rhea Hall were the demonstrators in a vocal workshop yesterday. And so we got to see Susan's ability as an engineer as she, you know, mic'd everything up, got sounds together, EQ'd everything. And then we got to work with her from the point of view of a producer, which Susan also is. A platinum-selling producer who produced a Bare Naked Ladies album that, as we'll hear, paved the way for her to give up a music career and do a PhD in another subject that she was passionate about. So then she's a scientist. Then she's a person studying the origin and the meaning and the psychology of sound. And then she's a teacher as well, and we've experienced her over this past few days on all of those levels, and I think that you'll understand when you see and hear her articulate her thoughts about music and her observations and her passion for that, how it is possible for a person to be great. So without further ado, the first thing I sat down with Susan to talk about when we were talking about this presentation, and I said to Susan, look, I should probably tell you I quite like Prince. And so I will quite enjoy asking you questions about Prince, and, you know, stop me if it gets a bit intense and weird. I am a functioning human as well. But I also wanted to make sure that you understood that, you know, I didn't want you to feel that when you work with a very, very famous person, a person like Prince, you know, it's often the visibility of your own work and the sound of your name often gets subsumed by that huge personality, and I didn't want Susan's work to get subsumed by that huge personality. And I thought that a good place to start would be with your response. When I said that to you, I said, would you be happy to talk about Prince? Can we talk about Prince? And your answer was...
Prince was, I'd like to, I want to answer your question, but have we begun? Have we started? We're starting? Okay, so if we're starting, I can't begin without saying thank you to you, Victoria. Thanks, and praising you for how wonderful a job you've done bringing us all together. Thanks to my colleagues for agreeing to come. Outstanding. You're perfect at what you do. And thanks, colleagues, for coming and teaching me the things that I've learned over the last few nights. Thanks to participants in this event that we've been having this week. Thanks for being as good as you are, being really easy to work with, because there's stuff to work with. You're substantive artists, every one of you, and that makes it super easy. And thanks to the folks who financed this entire event this week, so making this possible. We've needed this so badly. You just don't get that many women together who are creative, and we always get the short end of the stick in the arts in terms of opportunities. It's really hard. We're working our way up that ladder and we keep sliding down. It's really hard to get a grip on it. This week has gone a long way for us in just getting us up one more rung. That matters a lot. So thank you. Now you had a question? I forgot. There was something. Oh, I think my response.
Your response to whether, when I asked you whether or not
Prince.
You were happy to talk about Prince.
Yeah. Prince was once in a lifetime, once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime artist, an extraordinary human being. He died without leaving instructions as to what we should do with the material in the vault. He died without a will. He died without leaving, appointing someone to carry on his work. So immediately after he died, we all got together, and there was actually a conference call with the members of the Revolution and myself and Sheila E. and Gilbert Davidson and Alan Leeds, and we're all on this conference call, and he had just passed away 24 hours earlier, and we're thinking, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? And the first thing was, well, we all have to be together. Let's all fly to Minneapolis and let's be together. So we did. We went to Minneapolis. We went to a hotel. We went to the bar in the hotel, and they gave us the whole night. And Wendy Melvoin brought a microphone, and she brought an iPad, and we set up that microphone, and we all just took turns telling Prince stories. We just had our own memorial for him. There were about 40 of us who were Prince employees, and we set up the microphone and we talked about him. And Maite, his first wife, was there, and she said something very moving, and all of us talked, and it occurred to me, if he's going to have a legacy, it's going to come from those individual memories of who he was. No one person can describe the man. No one biographer, no one person can say, I was there at the beginning, I was there at the end. He's like, think of a painting that's pixels and dots. A few dots doesn't give you the whole story, but if you get enough individual dots, a picture can emerge. And I realized that the best Prince biography would be a biography that gathers all of our stories. Because we told some really funny stories. Some of them I'd like to share tonight. But anyway, it made me realize I have an obligation to that man. I loved him. I hope that becomes clear in the stories we share. We all loved him deeply. He was worthy of love, and we're devoted to him, and that's how we're going to keep him alive, by telling you about him so that you'll know him when you listen to his music. You'll know who he was. You'll know that someone like that existed, and so that you'll be on the lookout for the next one. There's a young man or a young woman out there who needs the opportunity, who needs to find that door to become the next one. So yeah, talking about him is a joy, it's a privilege, it's something I love to do, and pleased that people ask, and we sit here all night and tell Prince stories with pleasure.
That's lucky. All right. In that case, what do you most want people to know about him?
Oh, you got to think about this for a minute. Just think about this. And mark this date on the calendar, September 21st. There's going to be a release of an album. Excuse me, I'm going to be an engineer for just one moment. There's a delay. My voice is delayed coming out of this speaker. It's driving me nuts. Is that, could that be fixed? Because half of me is talking and the other half is listening thinking, that should be fixed. That should be fixed.
1, 2, 1. Check.
Hello.
Check.
Hello. Hello.
No practice,
Is that better? Yeah. It's not like there's an engineer in the house anywhere here. Okay, thank you. So this album is going to be, this recording is going to come out on September 21st. And what it is it took place in early 1983. That was the year that I joined him, but this recording took place right before I joined him. So picture his home on Kiowa Trail in Chanhassen, just a split-level suburban home. And he had upstairs the living room, the kitchen, and there was a small Yamaha, like a small baby grand piano, and it was painted a pale lavender purple. And downstairs below was where a bedroom was his one-room studio. So what he did was have his engineer at the time, Don Batts, the fellow who I replaced, he had Don put up a reel of tape and did what he did with me many times, just put microphones on his voice and on the piano and put the machine and record. A recording was found of him doing that in 1983. It's one of many, but this one is just a quintessential one. What you're going to hear is a 23-year-old kid on piano in his home. And he's playing and he's singing. Not for an album. He's not tracking an album. Not for his band. Not for an audience. There's no one there. It's just him at the piano. And what you're going to hear is a vocal performance that's as good as anything you've ever heard on any record. I dare you to find anything that's at least much better than it. What you're going to hear is a 23-year-old, and that left hand has got that pocket on that piano, and the right hand knows blues. And he knows blues progressions, and then sometimes that right hand knows jazz, and he gets into jazz harmonies. And this kid is ideating as he's playing, and you're hearing him do snippets of songs. I think there's even a snippet of maybe the Beautiful Ones on there. I don't remember, Purple Rain. I only heard it one time, and it was just a few weeks ago. And you're going to hear him go into Mary, Don't You Weep, old gospel song. And he gets a little bit, because, it's a woman's name, Mary, and we know that he was religious, but we also know he was... do you use the word Randy over here? we know how he was. So he's like, Mary, your man's not coming home. Your man's not coming home. And you're hearing his relationship with the sacred and the profane. And you're hearing him go back and forth. And you're hearing how he's treating this piece. It's gospel, and yet it's a woman, and I'm a man. And you're hearing him think for 30, 35 minutes, and it will break your heart because you realize that's who he was. None of it was an act. When he's on stage and he's killing it on 10, that's how he performed. That wasn't amped up for the stage. That was him. If you've seen the video to Nothing Compares to You, we did that together in the summer of, was it 84, I think? and you're seeing him playing around at rehearsal. This is him. It's a kid who at any given hour of any given day can give you the greatest show you've ever seen in your life. Every day. That was him. And let's quote his own words from Sometimes It Snows in April. Those kinds of cars don't pass you every day. I knew how great he was because we were joined at the hip for over 4 years. But to hear that tape and be reminded, that's how he played and sang when no one was watching. Just check it out, September 21st. I wrote to the A&R person, the wonderful Michael Howe, who made all this possible, and I said, Michael, if this doesn't cement his legacy in the pantheon of greatness, nothing will. If you don't hear it in that tape, you can't hear it.
So how did you first come to find yourself working with him?
I was a big Prince fan because I was in Southern California. I grew up in Southern California. I just started my career in Los Angeles in 1978 when his first records came out. In Los Angeles in the 70s and through the 80s, we had this wonderful, wonderful thing, lots of radio stations. So the two R&B soul stations were KJLH, Kindness, Joy, Love, and Happiness, owned by Stevie Wonder, and KACE. So you could just drive around LA, which you had to. You can't go anywhere in LA without a car, and listen to these radio stations, and all the best funk and soul and R&B would be playing in the late 70s, early 80s. So I first heard him on the radio and fell in love. But actually, the first time I heard him, I was on a bus in Los Angeles, and there was this kid in the back of the bus who had a boombox, and he was I think he was tripping his brains out because his pupils were really dilated. He looked like he was about 14 or 15 years old, and I was amused by this. So I sat next to this kid. It was interesting, and he's listening to the radio, the same station I listened to, and I remember when Soft and Wet came on, and I thought, whoever this artist is, I need to know who this is. So I was an instant fan from the early days. I saw him play the Dirty Mind tour. I saw him play at Flippers, and I saw Lisa Coleman on stage, and I just thought that this was the greatest band ever because they combined two of the things I really loved, funk and soul, but it was art music. This was punk. This was punk too. I was totally into it. It was my favorite band. So I was working for Crosby, Stills and Nash at the time, and I was their studio maintenance tech. And my ex-boyfriend, John Sacchetti, was the chief tech at Westlake Audio. And John was from Boston, so I'll do the accent. He called me one day and he says, Sue, your dream job is waiting for you. Sue, Prince is looking for a technician. Sue, call Glenn right now. You got to call him. It's your dream job. Call him. What? Prince is looking for a technician? Yeah, no one else wants to go. Call him. So Prince told his management, find me a technician and get me someone good. It's got to be someone from New York or LA. No fooling around with the local Minnesota talent, because the guy who had been his technician was a stereo salesman and couldn't repair his stuff. He was, literally. So I was an audio technician in Hollywood, and I was repairing consoles and tape machines, so I knew my stuff. I'd been in it about 5 years at this point. So Prince told his management, find me a technician. Management went to Westlake Audio, where Michael Jackson did all his records, and Glenn Phoenix from Westlake Audio went back to the tech shop and asked all the boys in the tech room, Prince wants a technician. Anybody know anybody? Anybody want to go work for Prince? And at this time, Prince was just coming off the 1999 tour, so a lot of people didn't know, especially in the rock pop world, they didn't know how great he was, so no one wanted to work for him. That's why John picked up the phone and called me and said, your dream job is waiting for you, because he knew that was my dream job. And I said, yeah, it's me, don't let anyone else take that job. I was interviewed by Glenn of Westlake, and I was interviewed by the management, and they said, yeah, you'll do. And so I packed my bags and I moved to Minnesota and started.
So one of the things that Susan has talked to us about is, because Susan is also an incredible student of psychology, and most particularly the psychology of music and the psychology of sound. And one of the things that you've talked about a few times, which has really resonated with me, is that moment where you hear a thing and you want it to belong to you, and your gesture is all about this. It's like, give it to me, I want that. What was the thing that you heard in Soft and Wet, or whatever it was, the first thing you heard on the boombox in the back of the bus? Have you ever thought from a psychological perspective what thing it was that grabbed you and took you and made that music yours?
The first song was cognitive appraisal. Psychologists say there are 6 proposed mechanisms through which we feel an emotion in response to music. And it ranges from sound as a special form of touch, sound alone, a deep, low rumbling. I thought that was a message from the divine. Yeah. So there are 6 proposed mechanisms. Sound as a special form of touch can cause you to feel an emotion. I'm getting pedantic for just a moment, but
please,
you might find it interesting. So a low rumble, we've evolved to regard a low rumble as a dangerous signal. So you take that bass and you just rumble that bass, and I can tell a story about Prince and the bass eventually. We get a little bit of fear, and high staccato notes, if it's a melody, mimics the sound of happy children or little birds in the trees and a happy day. So the music systems that we have and our responses to it can be traced back to early humans before they had music, and their world was incredibly quiet. Imagine how quiet it must have been when there were proto-humans. So anyway, sound can cause us to feel an emotion, sound alone, but you work your way up the chain through associations with memories and things like that, and violations of expectancies when you write a nice chord change, and then all of a sudden it goes to that bridge, and there's that unexpected chord change. You're like, woo, that can cause you to feel something. But that's my response. But right at the very top is cognitive appraisal. You can listen to it and say, I recognize that is the work of someone who is a virtuoso. It may not have grabbed your heart yet, but you recognize that it's good. So initially, I think that's how I responded to Soft and Wet. I liked the elements that I heard in the falsetto. What really got me was on the second album, when you realized he could write, When You Were Mine, and I Want to Be Your Lover. And this kid who's got this skill set can write. And then when the Dirty Mind album came out, you realize, oh, he's got a game plan. This kid's a tactician. Because we talked about it in our workshop the other day, but when Prince jumped the queue and basically delightfully turned his back on the audience who would have followed him on radio and said, I'm going to make an album that they're not going to play on radio, but that's going to impress the critics and scholars, what he was doing was planting the foundation of a long career. And first he needed critics and scholars to notice him. So I recognized with Dirty Mind, like, this kid's badass. He means business. And then Controversy is when his sound and his color, Controversy was the first kind of light purple album cover. That's when that began to take shape. And then, of course, I loved it for the rhythm guitar, for the bass, for the way he programmed drum machine, just everything about it. It had the soul, it had the punk, it had the rock and roll rebellious attitude. It had, I wouldn't call Prince a genius lyricist, clever as hell. I wouldn't call him Bob Dylan, but he could turn a phrase. And pound for pound, I don't think anyone has written more melodic hooks. I mean, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Genius with melody, genius with rhythm, genius with harmony, brilliant. And could sing in the chest voice, but in that falsetto, you'd hear him deliver those screams. The soul preacher screams out of that little tiny body. Otherworldly. So the things that I suspected when I first heard him I came to realize, oh, there's all that and more. What you just heard, that's 1 on a 10 scale. That's his first gear.
How on earth do you capture that in a recording? Because you did.
Well, it's good that you asked the question, because most mere mortals don't and can't record like that. Most recordings that I've ever done have been rather collaborative. There's a producer who is responsible for the overarching, like the director on a film. Like we've got this script. The script is the text, the lyrics. The subtext is the arrangement, the emotional tone of the record. The engineer is like the cinematographer, and a combination cinematographer and art director. Will this be bright? Will it be dull? Will it be muted? Will we have long shots? Will we have close-ups? All those people collaborate to make a film and to tell a story from beginning to end. Musicians usually pass the ball around in the studio, but Prince didn't, because he had an eerie capacity when he wrote a song to, apparently he did anyway, to hear the entire song in his head. When he first thought of it, he heard the whole thing. He heard the rhythm, he heard the instrumentation, and because he could play everything except the horn, he did it all. He would just move from drums to bass to keys to guitars to vocals, and he would just bam, 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 bam. He didn't need a producer. He didn't need other musicians around. It was great if they were there, because we did a lot of recordings with the Revolution in the studio, but at rehearsal as well. But because he was so facile on so many instruments, and the ideas came to him almost fully formed, it was just like knocking down the dominoes to get it done. All he needed was an engineer to make sure current was flowing through the wires. Get these sounds out of my head, in through my hands, into the instruments, and then from that point on, get it onto tape, and for heaven's sake, get it back. Let there be no disruptions to this process. And that's what I facilitated for him.
It's kind of astonishing to imagine how calm you must have had to make yourself in order to keep up with all of that. Like, how do you not panic?
That's really insightful of you. That is what you had to be. He said to us once, this was great, I quote it a lot because it was just great. So we were at rehearsal, and there was a group, myself and some of the crew were standing around talking, and the crew was his monitor mixer, front of house mixer, Rob Cubby Colby, and there was his drum tech and his guitar techs. And anyway, the crew, they're standing around talking about one of the roadies, and I'm there too, and these guys were talking about how this roadie was an asshole. And we didn't see Prince walk in, and he came up behind us and he goes, "Who's an asshole?" And everybody got really quiet because they didn't want to rat anyone out. And so we just got quiet, and then Prince said, "Let's make one thing clear. There's only one asshole around here, and it's me." He was the boss. He was the asshole. He was, so what he needed was, as this alpha male, just for the love of God, don't challenge him. Don't make things hard for him. Just facilitate his creativity. Just make the conditions right so that it can happen. And the wonderful Alan Leeds, who was his operations manager, took those phone calls in the morning where Prince would spend 10 minutes on the phone with him and say, "Here's what needs to happen today," click, and then do the same thing with the wonderful Karen Krattinger, who ran his office and personnel, and he would call his management in Los Angeles and say, "Here's what needs to happen," click, 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 3 phone calls done, into the studio. No one bothered me from here on out. I told you what I wanted done. From here on out, for the remaining, what would it be, 23 hours and 40 minutes, I will be in the studio, so don't bother me. And then that's what we did. And the upshot of that, and this was actually a beautiful thing, because there was only one boss and one asshole, everybody, well, by his own admission, all of us really worked well together. We really looked out for one another. We really had each other's back. We were all soldiers in the same troop, I think is the word. And we looked out for one another because we knew how hard it was to keep the world out of his way.
Did you ever have to say no to him?
When I did is when we parted ways. What happened was, at the end of my tour of duty, I was exhausted, as you might imagine, because we worked around the clock. And I was his full-time employee, so I was with him constantly. If we were doing a movie, I was on the movie set. If we were doing videos, I was there. If we were on tour, I was there. Oh, please remind me to come back to touring, because I've got to explain how that went. But anyway, I was with him constantly. And finally we opened the doors of Paisley Park Studios, and finally now, instead of just the one engineer working at his home or in his warehouse, he could now have proper studios in Minneapolis and a team of engineers. And he was at home working at Paisley Park on the second Madhouse album, and he had sent me to Los Angeles to do post-production on the Sign of the Times concert film. So I'm in LA, and I met a guy. I met the technician who was working with us. There was a little attraction, and I hadn't been on a date. I hadn't been anywhere other than with Prince for these few years, many years, and one night I had a date with Billy Yodelman. Billy and I, after our work, we went on a date, freaking date. And I know, like the simplest thing in the world, I went on a date. And I got a call early the next morning. Prince had flown into Los Angeles. He'd flown into LA on the red-eye flight, and he couldn't find me. And it was the first time in 4 years that he didn't know where I was. He couldn't find me. He was furious. So we got to the Hollywood soundstage the next morning, and he was there ahead of me before I got there, which is a bad sign. So when I walked in on time, he was already there. As soon as I walked in, he said, "You, me," and he pointed to a vocal booth, and I knew what was coming. He was going to be angry, and I just knew inside myself, I'm not folding on this one. I'm not folding. It's not going to go your way this time. And we were alone in this vocal booth, and we were just toe to toe, and he said, "Where were you last night?" I said, "I was out." He said, "I couldn't reach you." I said, "I know, I was out. I was unreachable." And there was just this silence. He said, "That's not acceptable." And I said, I know. But it has to be. And I don't remember how the conversation ended, but we both looked at each other and we knew this thing has come to an end. Because now I have to be a human and do the things that humans do, and you now have people to take care of you, and we've come to the end of our road. It was sweet and it was sad, because we did care deeply about each other, but our relationship was 100% a working relationship, 100%, and something either it works or it doesn't. And when a working relationship doesn't work, there's nothing to talk about. You move on and you work with others, which is what we did.
So then when you look back across the recordings that you made together and the work that you did together, what is the track that you worked on that you felt you did your best work? Is there one?
It wasn't a particular track, but my most heroic, I almost said moment, it was 96 hours long. That was something no one else in the world could have done for him. Here's what happened. It was a Friday morning. We had lost the lease on our warehouse, which is just a commercial warehouse where we rehearsed, and so they had to find a new building. So on this Friday, we're moving into our new warehouse, which is a space kind of like this, only bigger, but it was warehouse. And we were taking delivery that day of a new recording console, a soundtrack. Stupid truck doesn't show up until like 6 o'clock in the evening on Friday. They unload the truck drivers say, "Good night, see ya." And they unloaded the truck, and I've got the console and the power supplies and no wiring diagram. And my job is to wire up the entire console, all the inputs and all the outputs and the tape machine and the outboard gear and the amplifiers and the whole business with no wiring diagram, no schematic. So really bad, but there's no one to call because this came out of New York, and New York is already closed, and it's a Friday night. There's no internet. So I have to stay up all night with a voltmeter, and I have to ohm out every single patch point from the patch bay to the back of the console where the terminal plugs are. So I already know I'm going to be up all night. So I'm there, I've got my wires, I've got all my stuff, but I'm there all night wiring it all up. Takes me till middle of the day Saturday. I'm still in the same clothes and everything. He comes down. He's all happy because now I've tested everything out and set up the band. The band is rehearsing. So I'm still there, because I have to be there while he's rehearsing. So I'm there Saturday night, and God damn it, wouldn't you know it, he writes a song. So because he's written a song, I got to stay up and we got to keep recording. So it's now Saturday night, and it's coming into Sunday morning. And at the end, he gets off the stage and calls up Alan Leeds and says, I hate this building, get me the old building back. He hated the building. God. I had to take the whole thing apart. It's now Sunday. Unwire everything. Alan, the miracle of the genius Alan Leeds, managed to get us back into the old warehouse, truck it back over to the old warehouse. It's now Sunday. I hook it all back up again. At least I've done my own wiring diagram. I've gone home to shower and change clothes, but I have not slept. It's Sunday. I got that up, and he's happy. And when he's happy, he writes a song. He had formed a friendship with Sheena Easton, and she had said to him, you can't just write a song that goes la la la, he, I love you, you love me. And he said, watch me. So, you know, he's hanging out with his friend Sheena Easton on the phone while he's waiting for me to wire up all this stuff. And that gives him time to write a song. So it's now Sunday night, and we're recording la la la, he, I am a dog outside your door. He flies Sheena Easton in from Los Angeles because she's ultimately going to be doing vocals on You Got the Look. It's Monday, and I'm still up. And we finish recording at the warehouse, and it's Monday, and we take the tape back to his house. Because Sheena's flying in, and we're finishing overdubs. God damn it. And I remember we finally were getting the final mix going, and we print the final mix, and he asked me to do an edit on the mix. So I go over to the tape machine, and I've got the razor blade, and about to edit the mix, and I looked, and I picked up the tape, and I realized it was inside out. The tape was threaded inside out. I was that tired, and I was starting to see double, and I finally had to say to him, I don't think I can stand much longer. I've been up since Friday morning. It's Monday night. I have to go home. And he's like, stupid human being needing sleep. He called in David Rivkin, and David Z finished it up with him. He's not going to find anyone else who would have done that. So that was, I think that was the most me. I can't say that it was the most creative, but it was why I was with him. I had the skill set to be able to do that technically. I had the determination to get it done, and just I knew what he needed, and my job was to provide what he needed.
So what you describe sounds like this incredible artistic flurry so often, you know, that here is a person that you're working with that's just bursting with ideas and needing to capture those ideas. But actually, when you listen to the recordings, to the records that were released, the detail in the recording is incredible. And so incredible that 30, 35 years later, they're still, you know, records that people are trying to recreate in terms of sonic quality today. So while you might have been awake for 96 hours and might have been at the end of your tether in terms of levels of energy, you obviously still had an ability to pay attention to detail.
Yeah, I'm good at detail. I'm really good at detail, which makes me a good partner for artists and songwriters, because that's a strength of mine, is detail, which is stronger than global whole. When I joined him, we had a few advantages. He had all the money to buy really high quality audio equipment, and he taught me his ear. He taught me what he liked. And fortunately for me, I had the background that every good engineer needs. I had been a record fiend since I was 7 or 8 years old. I never had the desire to be a musician or to be a songwriter or a performer. My relationship with music is as a music listener. I love records. I love listening to records. So when my hands are on faders and I'm sculpting sound, I'm sculpting the thing I want to hear. So I enjoyed that. And I also have the technical background to know if I want to. I know what's going to happen when I dial in a piece of equipment. I know technically what it's going to do. So I had those abilities. I have a love of gear because those are the tools, just like you love musical instruments, because the gear is what lets you sing. You sing through that equipment. So I don't know if this is true. Maybe someone was saying it to make me feel good, but the Prince had a number of engineers after I left, and one is named Scotty Baldwin, and Scotty told me once he was in the studio with Prince, and Prince was asking him for something, and Scotty didn't know what Prince wanted and couldn't dial it in, and then he said Prince was sitting behind the console, and he leaned over and he spread his hands out, and he said, when Susan worked on this, she electrified the board. He spread out his hands. She electrified the board. Scotty told me that. I could see him saying that.
So what did he want to hear? How detailed was his ear for a keyboard sound, for the tuning of a snare?
He was a genius arranger. Miles Davis called him our generation's Duke Ellington. He was a genius arranger. So compared to other people, he could go through presets on a keyboard and dial in tones really fast. Really fast. Most of us take a long time to find the tone we're looking for. He knew it and could dial it in really, really fast. He had the incredible ability that only the best of the best bass players have. This is so rare, it's so hard to find. To be a bass player who can lay down a part before the other parts are on, and to be able to forecast how the remaining arrangements are going to go. He could do that because it was his own music, but some session bass players can do that with other people's music. The ability to know when to be down with the drums and when to be a kind of melodic and when to be harmonic and against the lead line and the main melody. So he had an incredible musical ear. His sonic ear was subservient to that. Back in those days, our kick drum had a lot of point on it. It sounded like a basketball, really. It was just really a pointy dance kick drum. The bass was usually lower than the kick. You know, the bass had the basement and the kick was a little bit higher than that. He taught me some things that I always loved, which is the hi-hat on the left, and the lead instrument would sometimes be slightly on the right. And he played, in those days, he played electric guitar with 11-gauge strings, the big, thick ones. It got thinner as he got older, but he liked a big, fat, clean rhythm guitar sound. He loved his Yamaha piano. We checked out a Bosendorfer once, and that was just not right for him at all. He really didn't like it. He liked the funkiness of the fast attack, and
You're so bright.
yeah, he liked that. Was good for him for recording that Yamaha piano, and yeah, he had his ear, he had his palate. After he passed away, and the Revolution and I, we went back to Paisley Park last year, and I went into the control rooms. It was the same stuff. He'd added a few new pedals to his guitar pedal board, same stuff. Same tape machine, the Studer tape machine that he had last had when I was last working with him in 1987. Outboard gear, same stuff. Console, same stuff. And I talked to his more recent engineers, and that's what they told me. I got to tell you, let me share a story. This is a great story from Chris James. Chris James and Dylan Dresdow were two engineers who worked with Prince from the year 2000 afterward. It was Dylan Dresdow who told this story. There were riots in the city of Baltimore when Freddie Gray died in police custody. There were riots. And this was around 2013, maybe 2014. Prince wanted to write a song about it. So he did. It was a brilliant song. They recorded it at Paisley Park. And Dylan is thinking, this is great. This is a great Prince song. And then Prince said to him, I want to put strings on it. And Dylan is like, no, it's going to be awful. It's going to be just a schmaltzy string thing. Why would you do that? It's perfect. And then Prince said, hand me my guitar. Because Prince didn't write music. He didn't write string parts. Dylan hands him the guitar. He said, label this track cello. He played the cello part on his guitar. Label this track viola. Played the viola part. Label this violin. And Dylan said, lesson learned. Never underestimate this guy. Never underestimate this guy.
So some of the things that I find really compelling about Prince's arrangements are his vocal arrangements and the way that he layered up incredibly complex harmony. You know, the background of his, you know, I'm thinking about something like gosh, I mean, it could be anything, but there's chromatic clusters, actually, that must take up a lot of space in the frequency range and must be a difficult thing to try and capture because there's a lot going on. You know, there was the harbinger of that in For You, the title track of that album, where he layers up himself kind of singing all of those vocal parts, but that kind of travels through to so much of his other work, just running along in the background, filling out textures. How did you deal with all of that vocal recording when it was the same timbre of voice and, you know, layering up all of those things together?
Yeah, he loved his sevenths and his ninths. He loved his gospel harmonies. He loved going to church because, church musically speaking, he loved those because he was schooled in R&B and soul music, so he knew that, so he could do that so quickly and so easily. Typically, the way he did vocals was all by himself in the control room. Because he needed that intimacy. So I would set up the vocal chain and put the U47, like they have at Roundhouse, put that big tube mic on a boom stand right in front of the console, the remote there. I'd label the patch cord, I'd set the compressor and the preamp and all that, label the patch cord and arm the track. And so then I'd leave the room and he'd do his vocal top to bottom. All he had to do was move the patch cord over one more hole and arm the next track on the tape machine to do the backing vocals. But what I taught him to do, because it's, as you said, the timbres, it helps a lot, is to slightly VSO the tape machine. You can slightly speed it up or slightly slow it down, and it shifts the formats. It maintains the relationships but shifts them either up or down. And it's that way you're not coloring with the same crayon. You're doing subtle shadings there. So that helped with that.
So with your really detailed understanding of how this one human being hears, feels, experiences sound, wants to hear it come back to him, what was it like recording someone afterwards?
Ha ha ha. I'm glad you asked that. Dylan Dresdow and Chris James said the same thing. They had the Engineers of Prince panel at Paisley Park, and we all said the same thing. You had to unlearn Prince, and that took time. So after leaving him, we had to unlearn that way of recording, and you had to learn how normal people do things and how much time they take. The first record I did after Prince was with the Jacksons. I worked on 2300 Jackson Street, so I flew out to Los Angeles, and I was working with Jermaine and Jackie and all the Jacksons except for Janet and Michael. They were on tour. And I learned from Jackie what it was like for them at Motown, and working with them was so slow. It was normal speed, but it was ridiculously slow. To take a day to do a vocal, like Prince would have considered that a travesty. He would have considered that a crime. To take studio time and only do a vocal? Hey, what's wrong with you? But that's how most people work. And you can feel it inside. You can feel yourself getting judgmental, which you don't want to get. You have to, that's what Chris James is talking about, unlearning Prince, that you have to recognize that what you encountered for these years was very extraordinary. It's like having been on a Jane Goodall out there with the chimpanzees and suddenly coming back into civilization. No, these aren't chimpanzees, these are humans now. So it's kind of like that.
So then, you know, you so you have this understanding of the way that it sounds, and you've kind of gone back out into the world and you've worked with normal humans. When was the moment where you started to hear music differently? When did you start developing other aural sensibilities and looking for other ways to create sound and working out how to create another sonic vision or realize another sonic vision?
That was very hard to do, but thankfully I worked with some producers who really helped me a lot, really helped me. They knew what I was going through and they taught me. The main one was Tony Berg out in Los Angeles. Tony was my mentor, and he taught me about alternative indie and sounds, and he was a Beatles and Stones fan, and I listened to primarily black music, and he listened to primarily white music by white people, and he taught me about the value systems And I do mixes for producers like Phil Ramone, and I did work with T-Bone Burnett, and just a few different producers who taught me things like that. But my musical abilities and professionalism changed when I met Tommy Jordan and Greg Kirsten of Gegita, and that changed everything for me and made me, I turned a corner and got up to the next level when I met those two guys.
What was it about their music that you responded to that kind of opened that door for you?
Well, I remember the first time I heard their music, I was taking a meeting at Warner Brothers Records. There was an A&R person named Kevin Lafferty, and we were playing music, and then he said, "I've got something to play for you." He said, "You won't be interested in it because they can't afford you. This band is on David Byrne's label. They don't have any money. But it's interesting, so I'll play it for you." And as soon as he played that cassette, I recognized whoever made this music knows something about music that I don't know, and I need to know. I just heard something that I had never heard before, and I recognized that's a real thing, that's an important thing, and this is unknown to me. I need to know that, the way they think. And I told Kevin, please put me in touch with these guys. And he did, and we began a long partnership, and they taught me, thankfully, what a relief, what you're making is not about you. It's not about you. It should not be a reflection of you. It should be a reflection of what music is. What can we discover about what music is? It can be an infinite variety of things. Right. Well, then let's try an infinite variety of things. Let's just try a bunch of stuff and see what we respond to. Once my ego completely left what I was doing, because I had been trying to be great, but I was trying to be great. I was trying to be great. Finally got it through my head. Nobody cares. Make a great record. Not buying me. Who cares? See if there's something great to be dug up out of the soil. See what you can find that's great in there. It doesn't matter whose hand touches it and brings it up. No one cares. Just see if you can find it, you guys, together. And that changed everything. And then from there on, I knew what to do when I mixed, when I produced, when I engineered. I knew what we were aiming for. They showed me the target. It changed everything.
So then when you came to kind of transform from engineer to producer, what was the change in your mindset to kind of open up into the world of arranging ideas, of production ideas, which I imagine that working for a person like Prince, those instincts and impulses would be quite stifled because you're always in the service of a really dominant and very clear and very determined creative voice, and then you move from engineer to producer and you've got this opportunity to cast out into the world of music around you and to cast into the personalities that you're working with and draw things out that, there's freedom there. How did that express itself in your work?
Well, I was always and still am really honored to be asked to produce. Like everyone else, I'm insecure. Will I be good enough? Why don't you ask somebody else? Maybe they'd be better. You never know. But you recognize that what they're asking you for is your opinion. They're asking you, lend me your ears. Listen to my music and tell me what you think. And that I can do. All of us can do that. That was my thing when I was a kid, is to listen to music and come up with an opinion. To be a producer or an engineer means that you have formed a decision criterion. You have it's really a criteria that separates, it's a psychological boundary between good and bad. And these things are, they say that categories don't exist in nature. They're driven by a praxis. Human beings create categories. So every time we listen to a performance or a lyric or a sound or anything, we as individuals have this psychological boundary, and on one side is good and on the other side is bad. It formed, and it's constantly forming, from all the music you've ever heard in your life. So I'm a better producer now because I'm older. I've heard more music. We've been talking this week about these 19 and 20-year-olds who are real hot shots. They still don't have the weight of life behind them. They're really good at one thing. Wait till time moves on, and we'll see how good they are. Time will tell. Anyway, yeah. So you form this decision criteria, this boundary, and everything you hear, you're deciding. If it's on the bad side, you're on that talk back, and you're saying again, 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 again. And if you're any good, you're offering concrete suggestions as to how it can traverse that boundary, what needs to get it on the other side of that boundary. And God damn it, you better be on that talk back when you hear that it's right. And so sometimes it's going to be right on the edge and you won't be sure, but that's the job. That's the producer's job, that's the engineer's job. Each one of us has a different set. And so that's why some producers are much better than others. And some producers have the musical skills, the music theoretic skills that they can go to a piano and they can say, I want this, and they can play the actual chords. I don't have that ability. All I can do is speak as a listener and say, this sounds insincere to me, or this sounds too heavy-handed, or that was perfect. I know you thought it might have been a mistake, but it was evocative, and that's all you can do is tell them what you hear.
So then, when you had a hit record with the Bare Naked Ladies, and you had enough points in that record to afford you a financial opportunity to make a decision about what the rest of what the next phase of your life was going to be. And listening to you talk in such detail about the way that you work with people, the way that you hear, the way that you translate those ideas, it's really clear, probably in retrospect, how analytical and how kind of curious your thoughts are about what you're hearing and experiencing. So I imagine in retrospect it makes sense that you then wanted to become an academic, that you then wanted to understand more about the thought processes themselves rather than the noises.
Yeah.
What was that process? What led you to go, okay, see ya, music industry?
Yeah, I thought I would really enjoy the life of a scientist, and then I'm a born engineering mind, knee bone connected to the shin bone. I like mechanisms and systems and how they work, and it turned out that neuroscience was just ideal for me. It just lights my Christmas tree because it's very, very complex, and it is, we're trying to take emergent phenomena, which is thoughts and things like that, and reduce it to patterns of neural activity. And it's insanely complex, which means you're not going to have the answers in your lifetime, which means you can be curious your whole life. For many of us, that's the itch we want to scratch. I want to be curious, and I want to pursue them and see how close I can get. So I knew I would enjoy it. I really love animals, and I love the notion of intelligence, and in particular, I wanted to explore consciousness in pigs. I chose pigs, I chose pigs because of all the intelligent animals, they're the only ones we treat terribly cruelly. We are so cruel to one of the most intelligent brains on Earth. And I think humans, I'll get editorial for just a moment, I think our conscience is going to haunt us in future generations for how we've treated intelligent species. And we've treated whales and all kinds of other things badly, but at least whales are out there swimming around, and squirrels are pretty intelligent and things like that, and they're doing their thing, but we're taking an intelligent mind and we're going, oh, bacon. And I mean, we're using it, we're using it to put on our hamburger, which already has a cow there and cheese. Like, how much more fat do you need? Jesus, it's something's body on your donut. I saw that the other day, a donut with bacon on it. I thought it was the end times. Anyway,
fun fact, Susan's a vegetarian.
Anyway, I thought pigs will be free in 2003. I wanted to study intelligence and be able to publish scientific reports that would show their abilities. So that was my grand plan. But when you get your PhD at 52, you're living in a dream world if you think you're going to have a scientific career, because it's going to be too short. Like the sciences, like the arts, you have to start when you're young. So fortunately, I didn't get my dream. I accepted a job at Berklee College of Music, where I teach our young musicians advanced production techniques, analog recording techniques, but I also teach music cognition and psychoacoustics. And so I get to walk that tightrope between the sciences and the record-making skills. And in the research that I do I contribute as a former record maker to the conversation on the neuroaesthetics and the neurobiology of creativity and of musicianship, and also on hearing health in musicians.
So now that you've got this perspective on the neurobiology of creativity, and you look back on the work that you did with a person like Prince, and you think about things that you've recorded, the way that those sounds work together, the way that they, with a new perspective, affect the body, the mind, the structure of the way that we think. You think about a recording like, for instance, something like, let me just pick at random one of my favourite Prince songs, the Ballad of Dorothy Parker. To me, as a layperson, the things that I've loved about that song, sorry, back to me for a moment. The thing that I've always really loved about Prince, one of the things I've really loved about him is his strange, deep clusters. Because I'm a harmony nerd, and I love competing frequencies at really close proximity to each other. And it's something I've loved about Prince's music right from the very first thing, and we discussed this, you get that first aha moment with a piece of music. The first aha moment for me with Prince was when I was 8 years old, and I heard the opening synth chords of Little Red Corvette. And that is a cluster chord on a kind of a really, is it a square wave? Is it a square wave? People who know about synths?
It's square wave-ish, yeah.
Yeah, and it's got that kind of complicated texture, and you've got this cluster, and the cluster only moves in a small way as you listen to the harmony, right? Going off on a little bit of a nerdy tangent, I do apologise. What was my question?
The Ballad of Dorothy Parker.
The Ballad of Dorothy Parker. That's full of bass frequencies. To me, that song shouldn't work. It's got complicated chords. They're all occupying a dark space. It's a warm, fuzzy instrument that's playing them. There's this kind of strange drum sound. There's how on earth? And when you look back on it, what's the psychology of why that works?
The psychology of why that works is because I didn't get fired that day. The reason it sounds the way it does is it was an accident, and it wasn't my fault. But what happened was he had custom ordered a new recording console to be delivered to his home, and the guy who was custom making this console wasn't getting it done in time. So Prince ordered the console to be sent out ready or not, and the guy along with it to help finish the wiring. And Prince couldn't stand it anymore, so at one point he just sent the guy home, and he said, "Susan, finish it." And it wasn't quite ready. So finally, all I had to do was, just as fast as possible, get signal through all the channels, and we're good to go. So we had to go fast, because he'd been taking a nap, and he dreamed this song. He was with Susanna Melvoin. I'd love to share some Susanna stories, because I just love her so much, and she's funny and smart. And she was Prince's fiance for a bit in the 80s, and he and Susanna were fighting, and it was kind of rough. And he just slept just to get away from it all. And it was Susanna, who, because she was so bright, she taught him about the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, and she just rocked his world. But she also taught him about Dorothy Parker. So he woke up and he came running downstairs, and I'm still working, and he said, "We've got to record right now. We've got to record right now. I had a dream." Okay. Let's put up the tape. I think everybody's ready to go. You just say yes to him and just hope for the best. And as soon as we started, he programmed the drum machine first, and right away I realized something's wrong. And I thought, okay, I've got to get him to stop, and he's going to kill me because he's been so patient. But something's wrong. This console should be super bright, and it's not. It was really dull. It sounded like it was underwater. I thought, okay, he's gonna be really mad, but I'll fix it as soon as he stops with the drums. But he didn't stop. He was like, I heard this. I don't have children, but I heard this from my niece was born. The first time they were feeding the baby with a spoon, they didn't know how much to feed her, And they just kept feeding her, and they figured, well, she'll stop, right? And finally they had to call 1-800-GERBER because they didn't know. They went through 2 jars of the baby food and like, she won't stop. And they just kept feeding her. Anyway, he wouldn't stop. So he did the drums, he did the bass, that funky bass. Oh, that's him at his best on bass. He did the keys, he did the vocals, and I thought, oh no, we're not just ruining the drums, we're ruining a whole song here because it had no high end at all. And he puts on all the keys and he puts on all the guitar parts, he puts on the vocals, he puts on the backing vocals. He said, let's mix it. What are you thinking? But he's really happy. And it's a typical 24-hour day, and we finally printed the mix, and by the next morning he said, that was great, and he would get talkative after the song had turned the corner and he knew it was going to be good. And so he was telling me things. He said, I actually dreamt it. I dreamt the chords and I dreamt the lyrics and the whole scenario. I just had to get it down on tape, and he's happy, happy, happy. So he gave me some instructions of whatever, and he's about to walk out of the room, and he said, I like this console. It's kind of dull, though. Time I'm realizing something is terribly wrong, and he went upstairs, and I finally got out the voltmeter, and I saw that one whole half of the bipolar power supply was down. So a console is going to have a negative 15 volt supply and a positive 15 volt supply, so it can swing current negative and positive with respect to ground. One half of the power went down. So anytime there would be anything with a fast attack, there just wouldn't be current enough to swing it. So it all sounds really lo-fi. It only sounds as good as it does because Bernie Grunman was able to add high-end and mastering. But believe me, in the control room that day, it was under blankets. He didn't care. He didn't care. He got what he wanted, and it served the song because the song, it came to him in a dream. It was about a dream. It was so sweet, the lyrics, he said in the lyrics, he said he was in a dark room fighting with lovers past. I needed someone with a quicker wit than mine. Dorothy was fast. He just needed a friend. That's what it's about, meeting a waitress, and she's funny. And she says to him, you're cute. You want to take a bath? And he says, yeah, but I'm going to leave my pants on because I'm kind of going with someone. And she says, sounds like a real man to me.
Want to take a bath?
Want to take a bath? Yeah. And what's funny about it is, I forget exactly what it is, but he sits down at the diner, and she says, what do you have? And he says, I'll just have, is it a fruit salad or something? A fruit cup? Yeah, just have a fruit cocktail.
I ain't hungry.
I'm not hungry. What kind of a brother from the inner city orders a fruit cocktail? That was Prince. He was himself with all of his might, unembarrassed, unashamed. I have many Prince stories I'd like to tell that are funny.
Please do. I'll just sit here quietly while you tell them.
That tell you who he was. This one comes from the beautiful Susanna. Susanna Melvoin and Wendy Melvoin are identical twins. Susanna is heterosexual, Wendy is homosexual, grew up together in, their dad was a member of the Wrecking Crew. The great Michael Melvoin, LA session pianist, jazz pianist. They met the Colemans. They knew Wendy and Lisa eventually became lovers in Prince's band, and they've known each other since they were in diapers, these incredible people. Anyway, Prince loved Wendy and hired her in his band when she was 18 years old, I believe, this badass guitar player who just happened to be Lisa's friend. And then he met Susanna. And he was ass over tea kettle, because this woman is beautiful and funny and smart and knows Hollywood and is easy to be with. And when you meet Susanna, she just lights up a room. She still does today. She's just one of those people who, you don't forget her. Anyway, she told the following story, and this illustrates what a lady she is. So at the memorial for Prince, there were a lot of Prince former girlfriends there. There's Sheila E., there was Maite, his former wife. So a lot of ex-girlfriends are getting up to tell stories. But when I was with Prince, Susanna was his fiancée, and I would argue that I think Susanna may have been the love of his life, because they were really ridiculously close, and she was so perfect for him. She really understood him. Anyway, We're all taking turns telling stories. Susanna could have told so many deep stories, but because Maite, the woman who had been his wife, was there, Susanna told a story that was not as intimate. She told about the time when we were in the south of France making the Under the Cherry Moon movie, and Prince, she was living with Prince in a rented house there, and Prince says to her one morning, and this is, like, these words never come out of Prince's mouth, he said, "Get your bathing suit, we're going on a boat." And she's thinking, I don't think I've ever heard him use the words bathing suit or boat ever. In all the years I've been, Prince on a boat? And she's just looking at him. He says, come on, get your bathing suit. We're going on a boat. He had rented a boat. We didn't even know he could swim. So Susanna and Prince go out on this little boat in the south of France, in Nice. And then he comes out and he's got the little swim goggles on in his bathing suit. He says, put on your goggles. We're going underwater. What? Prince? He just didn't do those kinds of normal things. And he jumps off the boat into the water. She's like, all right. And she jumps in after him. So he's underwater, and he's got the little goggles, and he's gesturing to her, swim over here, swim over here. Okay. She follows him. She's swimming underwater. Come on. They're underwater. Hurry. She gets over there. She gets up close to him, and he goes, he did it to make her laugh, and the remaining air that was in her lungs just exploded out of her, and she just shot to the surface of the water like a cork. She said she nearly drowned because then she swallowed so much water. It was just so funny. That's just who he was. They had a great time, but you never knew what was going to happen with him, and she was a real lady to tell that story, because there were a lot of women posturing as to who he loved the most. She was a lady.
Can you talk about some of your favourite songs that you recorded? Something like maybe Condition of the Heart or...
There were these things. I love that one. I love that one so much.
So beautiful.
There were certain songs. I used to call them... I loved that. That was one of my all-time favorites. I used to call them Sunday songs, because on Sundays is when the band would have the day off, so it would be him by himself. And a lot of times he'd do his most serious songs on a Sunday, the cross and certain things like that. Those were his Sunday songs. And then we were at home, Minneapolis, at the warehouse, and he would always call me in the morning and tell me what to set up. We need acoustic piano, we need this guitar, we need this sound. So I'd have all the sounds ready to go so he could just move from instrument to instrument. And I remember that, as much as I do remember of it, I remember we dimmed the lights and lit candles, and it was just us, and we got it done. But what I think is important about it, in addition to being beautiful, is the lyric. I would argue that the reason so much material ended up in the vault and other material was released, that the distinction between what went in the vault and what was released was driven almost entirely by the lyrics. Because he was shy, because he was socially isolated, because he didn't have friends, because he got signed to a record deal when he was 18 years old, and because he was the asshole, he didn't have he didn't have anyone to talk to other than girlfriends. But then, he's a young man who can't commit to a woman, so he's fighting with the girlfriends. He talked to people in his lyrics. And when he says there was a lonely musician, he says, and wasn't that a foolhardy notion on the part of a sometimes lonely musician? Acting on a whim is only good for a condition of the heart. He wrote it at the time when he was infatuated with Susanna. He had met her and he realized, I'm fucked, because she was so perfect, but she was with someone else. She was with a boxer whose name I don't remember, and she wasn't quite ready to leave this other guy and be with Prince. She just didn't have her mind made up, and he knew he had it bad. And there were women, he was getting famous now, and there were women who were after him, like a dame in Paris or a dame in London or whatever, a real princess who would be after him. But he didn't want any of them. He wanted Susanna, and that chorus of thinking about you's driving me crazy. My friends all say it's just a phase. But
every day is a yellow day.
Yeah, I'm blinded by the daisies in your yard. And when he says there was a woman from the ghetto who made funny faces just like Clara Bow, that was Wendy. How was I to know that she would wear the same cologne as you and do the same giggle that you do whenever I would act a fool? Yeah. It was so sincere. He's telling his audience, this is me. He was willing to be honest, but you had to know that he was being honest.
Can we talk about Wendy and Lisa?
Yeah.
One of the things that was so extraordinary about Prince to me as a young girl, and I was 8 when I discovered his music, and then it kind of it interwove itself into the fabric of my life, but not just his music, his approach to creating it and the people that he aligned himself with. And so many of them were women. And so many of them were extraordinary women. And I can remember following Wendy and Lisa's career long after, they stopped working with Prince too. I remember hearing tales of the fact that they were the people that introduced the Fairlight into his musical language. I've read that somewhere, I don't know if it's true, perhaps you could confirm. But I've always, having loved an artist who's created this music and seen that artist's fascination and also rejection of any kind of gender stereotype and his invitation to just anyone. His band was made up of this kind of, to my eyes as a young person, this colourful ragtag fleet of geniuses. And they could have been anything. He didn't care. He cared that they were good at what they did. Anything else, irrelevant. And that to me is one of the kind of shining resonances from his work. And I wanted to be Wendy and I wanted to be Lisa. I was a nerdy kid. I was studying classical piano. I read the story as a young child. He'd heard Lisa playing Mozart somewhere and that drew him to her playing because it just set her above people that were just playing blues progressions, for instance. Similarly with Wendy, one of the greatest rhythm guitarists in the history of rhythm guitarists. Got any stories about them?
Yeah, I'll tell you how Gail Chapman was the first keyboard player in his band, and she left. She couldn't take it after the Dirty Mind. The Dirty Mind they crossed a line for a lot of musicians. So she left, and Prince told his management, he says, I liked having a woman in the band. Do you know of anybody in LA who's any good? So they knew of Lisa and sent Lisa out to Minneapolis to meet with Prince. But Lisa's one of the quietest people I know. She was almost catatonic. She almost never spoke for a while. She's when she speaks, it's great, but Wendy does all the talking. So the beautiful Lisa came out. Prince picked her up at the airport. They're young people. This is before he's hugely famous. It's a very quiet conversation in the car because neither one of them talks much. And they get out to the house and there's not much conversation going on. Wendy told me this story. Prince went into the other room to call his management. He actually had his management on the phone to say, she's not the right one for me. While Lisa was waiting for him, she went to the piano and began to play. When you hear her play, she pets the keys. It brings me to tears. It's like hearing the call of an ancient voice. I mean, I sound ridiculous, but what this woman knows about chords, what she knows about dynamics and where she goes, it break your heart. That's just Lisa. That's not her showing off. That's her voice. She's just killing time. She's on the piano, and he's on the phone, and he says, never mind. She was in the band. Wendy had just graduated from high school, baby Wendy, 17 years old, and wanted to go out on tour and visit her childhood friend, Lisa. So Wendy goes out and visit Lisa. They weren't a couple at this point. Wendy's still a baby for all intents and purposes, but she goes out and she brings her guitar with her. This is another good story. Prince and Des Dickerson, the guitar player in his band, had been fighting. This was on the 1999 tour. And they were just on the outs, and Prince is walking past Lisa's room, and he heard some James Brown on the other side of the door, and he thought, fuck, what's Des doing in there with Lisa at this hour of the night? And he knocks on the door, Lisa opens, and there's baby Wendy, 17 years old, just grooving hard, this funky white girl. He hired her, and her very first gig was the First Avenue show, but the first gig on the Purple Rain tour was at the Joe Louis Arena in Detroit in front of 18,000 people. She's a kid. Yeah, they did something extraordinary too, because Wendy and Lisa were a couple for a long, long time, owned a house together. After they left Prince, they had a business, made music together, signed to a record deal, produced other people, did film scoring, and their relationship broke up. It just didn't work. And it's hard to imagine a couple that could be a couple for that long and a business together, split up and keep the business together and still be friends. That's just a testament to who they are. They still work together, they love each other. They couldn't love each other more. They're each with different partners now, and each one has a child, but they're as great as they've ever been. And now they're touring with the Revolution to keep Prince's memory alive.
I feel like I should probably let somebody else ask a question.
Before we do, can I tell just one Prince story that I think is really funny?
No, I'm afraid we've run out of time.
Oh, have we?
No, we haven't. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, okay.
I'm being silly.
So, because I didn't tell you about touring, and you should know this. So, you go on tour. We're on the Purple Rain tour. That was my first tour. And you'd play 14, 15, 20,000 seat arenas. And when most young people would finish playing to 20,000 people, they'd come off stage and you would think they'd want to party or get high or something. This kid was ready to go to work. So we would come off stage and the night was young for him. He'd go back to the hotel, shower, change clothes. I would do one of two things. We'd had a second set of gear, musical instruments and stuff, and we'd either go to a club and set up to play an after party, or we'd go to a recording studio because we'd be working on albums by the time as Sheila E. I would have booked these studios in advance if I knew he wanted to go to a studio. So he'd play sound check for like 4 hours, play a 2.5-hour set, get off the stage, go right to a recording studio. We'd work all night, and then take the tapes and get on either the bus or a plane to go to the next city. Anyway, we had booked a studio in Cincinnati, and this was the dead of winter. And I got to the studio, I think it was called Fifth Floor Recording, and some of the crew guys came with me. There was Sal, and there was Robbie Pastor, who was Prince's kind of valet, and David Tickle, who was mixing front of house on Purple Rain. So it's the three guys and me. And we get to ground floor studio. We unloaded the truck. We're out on the street. We got to take the tapes and all the gear up. And I think it was Sal who said, we rang the buzzer. And nobody answered. They knew we were coming, and Prince was going to be here any minute. He's at the hotel, showering and changing clothes. All right, we got to get upstairs. We got to get this stuff set up. Time's wasting, boys. So Sal says, I'll just take the stairs and I'll go up. Sal goes up, and he doesn't come back. It's midnight, 12:30, maybe 1 a.m. on a dark, freezing cold street, downtown Cincinnati. Sal goes up, and he doesn't come back. So David Tickle says, I'll go. David goes in, doesn't come back. And I'm alone with all this gear on the street, just me and Robbie Pastor, and Robbie says, I'll go. And I said, Robbie, I don't care what's happening up there, whatever is happening, come down and get me. Because, of course, we didn't have cell phones. Go. Robbie goes up, does not come back. Prince is going to be there any minute. So a level-headed person would have just stayed there and waited for Prince, but I can't. I've got to get the gear up there. So what the fuck? So I went up the stairs, and I need hand gestures for this, but I got to the roof of the building, and I see up against the brick wall, Sal, David, and Robbie standing against the wall in the I surrender position, like this, and cops with guns drawn, pointed at them. They had tripped a silent alarm that had gone to the police station. So they're there, and the guys are there. And I walked up with our most precious tapes in my hands, because I'm not going to leave the tapes on the street. And I walk up, and Sal looks at me, looks at the cops, and says to the cops, see, we told you, who brings a girl to a robbery? And I'm like, you guys, what are you doing? He's going to be here any minute. I didn't care that they had guns pointed at them because Prince was coming. I don't care what's pointed at you. Get us into this studio. That was just a Wednesday. That was just the stuff that would happen on the road. We moved heaven and earth. Oh, God. Robbie had to be his advance man, so when we'd go on tour, Prince was going to be doing like a lot of nights in London. So when Prince is arriving in London, you have to get all his stuff set up in the hotel, meaning you have to have, his clothes have to be there, and all his toiletries and stuff that he likes, and his stereo and all of his cassettes at that time, or CDs. His piano has to be there, his guitars, everything has to be set up so that when he walks in, he's ready to go. This is such a sweet story. It was nerve-wracking. So, again, hand gestures. Robbie, his flight was canceled, the advance flight, so he was going to be arriving in London only 8 hours in advance. Now, there was a rider, and everything should have been there in the room. Robbie gets to the hotel, in this quaint, charming hotel. He's up on the 12th floor of this charming hotel, and he walks in, and there's no piano. Disaster. There must be a piano. Instead, what there was a little electronic keyboard plugged into an amp. So Robbie freaks out, and he gets the concierge of the hotel, and he's like, there's supposed to be a piano, it was on the rider. And the gentleman is like, no, we couldn't get a piano in the lift. You'll have to make do with this. And Robbie's like, ah, and Prince is gonna be here in just a few hours. So Robbie calls the magnificent Alan Leeds, and he's like, Alan, help me. Alan knows exactly what to do. He says, stay put. Alan calls a piano company. Can you rent a piano for this much time? Yes, we can do it. Can I get it today? Yes, you can have it. He calls a crane company, and he calls a flatbed truck and a piano mover. He has the piano picked up at the rental place, put on a flatbed truck, brought to the corner of this street and that street where this hotel is, has a crane come, pick up the piano. Robbie showed me pictures. The crane picks up the piano and is lowering it onto the balcony of this hotel. And Robbie's there with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Robbie was a little skinny guy, so he's there with the cigarette hanging. Catch this freaking piano. So the piano is loaded onto the balcony. They get it into the room finally. Take the blankets off of it. Piano tuner comes. Dee 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 dee. Tunes the piano. Leaves. They pay the guys. Pay everybody. Crane goes away. Minutes later, Prince walks in. Takes off his coat, sets down his bags, sits at the piano, and plays. Had no idea that heaven and earth was moved to get that piano there. Probably never knew the story of the heroic gestures on the part of Alan Leeds, who across an ocean can get a crane, a flatbed truck, a piano, get it in there in time, and that was our job. We kept the world out of his way so that he could create. That's what we did.
I've always been fascinated by that. I know I said you could ask questions, but I was lying.
It's your turn.
I've always been fascinated by the fact that Prince, as an individual human and creature, was able to forge a universe in his own image, and in order to facilitate his vision, he really had to, because the real world doesn't work like that. I'd love to be able to, well, there's many things I'd love to be able to do, but as a chimpanzee in the land of animals, I can't. It must have been a universe which meant that you had to relinquish something of your own universe. What does that mean? What is it like to have, well, I don't mean to ask anything quite so personal as that. I'm just interested in the experience of occupying another person's universe.
Oh, I see what you're getting at. Okay, I thought you were asking a different question. This is a service-oriented profession. Like Bob Dylan said, everybody serves somebody. The engineers and producers serve the artist serves the public, it just all goes in a big circle. We are, what we hope is that we can be involved in something that's bigger than us in our lifetimes. And I thought this work was important. It was bigger than me. It was going to last longer than me. It was worthwhile, work that needed to be done. And a lot of work needs to be done. And I thought this was among some important work. So that there's no sense that I'm being shortchanged. There's the opposite. There's the sense that I'm extraordinarily privileged that I get to contribute to something that's much bigger than me.
Could you also answer the question that you thought I was asking you?
Oh, yeah, I thought you were going to ask about Prince and his loneliness and his isolation.
Oh, yes.
This illustrates the point that Jesse Johnson, the guitar player from The Time, told me this story. It was sad. It was really sad. I think the year was 1982. You can find this clip online on YouTube. Someone was at this club, I believe it was in LA, and they had a video camera. What happened was James Brown was playing, and Michael Jackson joined him on stage that night. So the top of this clip is where Michael Jackson is on stage with James Brown. And Michael, a competitor, clever guy. Michael knew that Prince was up and coming and was likely to be his chief rival. So Michael did something, I think it was pretty tactical. He leans over and he says to James Brown, but you can hear him, Prince is here. Prince is in the audience. Call him on stage. Because Prince was on, this would have been either the Controversy Tour or 1999, maybe the end of one, beginning of the other. Prince is on stage, have him come up. Now, Prince wasn't quite camera ready at this point. He hadn't done Purple Rain. He hadn't quite figured out his stage persona and who he was to the public. It was still a work in progress. It was nearly done, but not quite. So Prince wasn't sure at this moment when he suddenly gets called out on stage whether to say yes or no. And I think initially he doesn't, but then eventually he does. And he came on stage, you'll see it on this clip. He's riding piggyback on Chick Huntsberry. Chick was the big bodyguard at the time. So he gets on stage, and there's Prince on stage. And he's on stage with his main inspiration, his hero, James Brown, and his main rival. And he's a young man with his hero and his rival. Tough place to be. You better, if you're going to deliver, you better deliver. And, this was bad. So Michael is there, and Prince starts to sing a little, and I forget the exact sequence of events, but I believe Prince is dancing first. He's kind of doing the James Brown, and right away he realizes, no, you don't do James Brown in front of James Brown. That's stupid. And then, now he's caught between a rock and a hard place, because the next dance he's kind of trying to do is kind of Michael's thing. And you don't dance on a stage with Michael Jackson. You don't. So Prince asks for a guitar. He puts the guitar around his neck and he starts to play a little, and he realizes, compared to dancing, this is really boring for the audience. I'm just there playing. So Prince realizes, I better exit before I make a fool of myself. And he takes off the guitar, and as he's exiting, he accidentally knocks over this light pole, like a stage prop. Deeply embarrassing. He couldn't outdance his rival. He couldn't outperform his hero. What Jesse told me is that they all got in the limo to go back to the hotel afterward. By they all, I mean Prince and his closest friends, the members of the time, kids he had gone to high school with. And they're sitting in the back of the limo, and Prince says to these guys, that was bad, wasn't it? And Jesse told me they all went, no, it was good. You were fine, you were great. Now, Jesse was the outlier. He was from East St. Louis, Illinois, so Jesse had just joined, and he had just joined, so he didn't feel comfortable with Jimmy and Terry and Morris and Jerome, those guys who'd known him a long time. And they said, no, you were great. You were great. And Jesse said he looked at Prince's face, and Prince just kind of sat back in the chair a little bit, and he realized, I'm alone. I'm alone. There's no one who's going to tell me the truth. If my best friends won't tell me the truth, no one will tell me the truth. I knew about that clip because Prince got hold of it somehow, and when he was at the house, I'd be working downstairs, and I'd go upstairs to tell him something was ready. He'd watch that. He'd watch the most embarrassing moment he'd ever had publicly. He'd watch it to learn from it. As painful as it was, if it meant he would learn something, he'd watch it. So he'd never make that mistake again. That's the question I thought you were asking, is when you make that deal with the devil to become a public figure, you have to recognize music is only a part of your life. And you're going to have to choose what to let people see and what to keep hidden for yourself. You have to choose that. And you have to find a way of protecting yourself so that the part that you keep hidden stays frickin' hidden. And if you make the beginner's mistake of trying to reveal everything about your psyche to the press and the public. No, just let me be honest. That's all. You know, people love me. Let me just be honest. They will eat you alive. Watch the movie Amy Winehouse, and you'll see exactly what happened. Yeah. She was such a pure artist. She was so honest. She just answered the questions. And it devoured her because it is endlessly hungry. So Prince figured out when he was quite young how to separate himself from his public face. And himself, I used to ask him, why don't you want people to know, like, that you played all these parts? Why don't you want people to know that you wrote this? Or the song Hello, about the incident that happened backstage after the American Music Awards. The LA Times, well, I quickly tell the story. Oh God, this is the 80s, and Michael Jackson had organized We Are the World at A&M Studios, and the We Are the World session was going to take place right after the American Music Awards, just down the street. So they had asked Prince to participate, and he said, no, that's not what I do. That was the honest answer. He was not comfortable in that setting, and that kid at age 25 at this time had the guts to take the hit and say, that's not what I do. It takes a lot of courage to be honest. And so Michael said, that's okay, and Prince said, I'll send Sheila E. in my place. Great, we'd love to have Sheila. And I was there in the room when Prince's side of the conversation took place, and he asked, can I play guitar on it? And Quincy Jones, who he was talking to, said, no, we've already got somebody. Okay. So anyway, that's fine, it's all good. So after the American Music Awards, all the celebrities went off to A&M Studios. Prince came off stage, and I feel the need to act it out. There's no need to act it out, but I feel the need. He's got the car is waiting. He's dating Jill Jones at the time. So Wally opens the door, Jill gets in, Prince gets in, and a photographer, a paparazzo with a camera, gets in the car, gets in the back seat of the car with them. Wally, bodyguard, grabs the dude, yanks him out. As he yanks this guy out of the back of the car, the guy hits his head and drops his camera. The next day, in the LA Times, in the entertainment section, it says, Prince spurns We Are the World. He doesn't show up to the sessions, and by the way, his bodyguard beat up a photographer. And I asked Prince, say something. Why aren't you going to say something? Tell them the truth. And I remember him looking at me and saying, they wouldn't believe me. And when you say something, that's when you open yourself up for even more criticism. So he didn't say anything. He let them think whatever they wanted to think. But then we were on tour, and I remember we were, right around that time, we played the Superdome in New Orleans, which holds 60,000 people. It's one thing to play in front of 20, it's another to play in front of 60. The sound was, I think, the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. 60,000 people screaming. The band took the stage. And we had a mobile truck there, and we were recording the show. And after the show was over, we played 2 nights at the Superdome. So after the show was over, that day at soundcheck, we had recorded a song he'd written for We Are the World. We had recorded For the Tears in Your Eyes. Yeah, we recorded on stage during soundcheck, and then he and I stayed all night in the truck at the Superdome to finish the song, to do the vocals and to mix and everything. So we finished it, and we'd been up all night, and in the morning, he said, I'm kind of hungry. Do you think there's any food here? And I said, I don't know. I'll go find out. So I took some change to find maybe a vending machine, and I went and I found like a conference room at the Superdome, big athletic center, right? And they were just cleaning up from some sort of meeting. So they had some leftover bread and meat, like salami or something, and cheese and some lettuce. And so I made him a little sandwich. For each of us, we had a sandwich, and we got some warm sodas out of the machine. They didn't have any ice. And brought it back to him, and he ate his sandwich, and he had his soda, and he was happy. We wrapped it up, we did the mix, and we left. People magazine reported on We Are the World, there was $15,000 worth of food. That was the catering budget for the We Are the World session at A&M. They had caviar, they had champagne, as they did a recording for hungry, starving children. Yeah. My man ate a leftover sandwich that people were about to throw out off a paper plate and had a warm soda to do the song For the Tears in Your Eyes, and did another show that night. Which one sacrificed for hungry children? I mean, come on. And that's the kind of stuff he didn't want the public, he didn't care if the public knew, he didn't care. So many times on that tour, we played hospitals during the day. We played for schools for handicapped children in wheelchairs, or not just in wheelchairs, but I mean profoundly handicapped children who, we played a school for the deaf. For people who couldn't come to the concert, we would take a whole second set of instruments and we would go and we would play and do a show. Prince would do those shows on the condition that the press not be there. He didn't want anyone to know. He just wanted to play for these kids who couldn't come to his show, as long as no one knew about it, as long as there was no credit. He didn't want the damn credit. He wanted to do this. Years later in his life, when he found out that Bonnie Raitt was about to be dropped from her label because she hadn't done anything in a long time, he secretly, anonymously funded her tour, paid her entire tour support through Warner Brothers so that her career could keep active until she found some good songwriters and could revive her career. He did the same thing for Michelle Ndegeocello, and I've heard he's done it for other women artists. Michelle told me that. He's done it for other women artists as well. When he knew that they were about to be dropped from their label for lack of money, he says, I'll put the money in, just don't let them know that it was me. That's the guy he was. That's why I want to talk about him. We need to know who he was. We need to know. He was no saint. I'm not canonizing him. He was no saint, but we loved him. A question? Yes?
I don't have a question, I just have a thank you for all of my life that I've lived, all the pain I've been through, that what you did, and like what you did, has been an absolute safety to me.
Thank you.
It's not often that I get to say thank you to those people, but
thank you.
I really appreciate it.
He knew it. He knew. His childhood was really difficult. His stepfather locked him in a room when he was a little boy. He was kicked out of his home when he was 14 years old. The kid suffered a lot of pain, and he knew who his listeners were, and he had a really loving heart toward people. He knew he had to isolate himself to do what he did, but he knew. Thank you. Thank you for saying so. Yeah. No, you know, it was the ether of youth. I was young. The ether of youth is that stupid sauce that makes you think I can do anything. And so my head was filled with that, and I went on sheer willpower alone. Just the joy of being there. People can do all kinds of extraordinary things. I was really happy. If I had had to get up and do really onerous things, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But it was really exciting, and I was so determined to keep that job and do well at it. I don't think I'm the worse for wear. I think I survived it. So, yeah, we all got through. I might want to tell you the pie story in just a minute. Yes?
I want to know, when people come downstairs and say, I've written a song, we need to record it now. Usually now someone writes a song and they lay down a demo or put it on their iPhone, and then you get to hear the entire song, and then you know what you recorded. When he played you the song, or would you just go, right, I'm going to lay down the bass line and here we go, and you wouldn't know what the song was?
You didn't know what the song was. So I would be changing sounds as we went along. It was all in his head. He didn't demo anything. If he's recording, it's for keeps. So, he never did anything. He rarely did anything twice, unless he thought there was maybe a better way to do it. But he rarely. Sometimes and I've got a note at home. It's really sweet. A note that he left for me on the console that said, I don't remember which song we were doing, but it was the list of the things he wanted. And he said, big long reverb, get a piano sound like this song, and I want a big reverb, like a big drum sound like in Purple Rain, and get all this stuff. And then at the end of it, he says, work fast, save my blood pressure, please. So I'd get something dialed in, but usually I could tell as he's doing the drum part, whether he's playing the acoustic drum kit or he's programming a drum machine. I know it's going to be a dance song, or it's going to be a pop song, or it's going to be a ballad, so I can just reach over and change the settings to complement what we're doing. Yes. Yes.
You've talked a lot about giving feedback to performers from a production perspective, like more emotion, less emotion, whatever. Did you do that for him? Because it also sounds like you're saying he didn't kind of need any of that. He had it all down pat from the get-go. Did he take your feedback?
Sometimes he'd ask, because he knew I was a fan of his music, and he would ask. I'd give him feedback when he asked. He certainly did a lot of recordings with his band, and most of the input, if it wasn't with the full band, it was Wendy and Lisa, because they taught him so much about music. They knew things about music that he didn't know. Lisa knew chords, and Wendy knew styles of music, like Brazilian and things like that Prince didn't know. So they introduced new flavors to his music that he otherwise would not have had. He needed them there. He loved working with Eric Leeds on saxophone. Prince usually gave the direction to Eric, but often he would leave Eric and me alone, and Eric would write the horn parts and he and I would record them. Susanna contributed a lot to the backing vocals, and he trusted Susanna quite a bit too. But yeah, he would ask sometimes, but not always. Yes? That's a great question. He was a bit religious, and at one point he would say when he was young that he was going to die when he was 33, like Jesus. But then he realized at some point that he wasn't God's other son, so he's going to have to keep going. Here's what we all think. When I knew him, he never took any sort of recreational drug. Well, he never took it habitually. He knew that his heroes like Jimi Hendrix tried acid, so he tried that once and wrote the song Moonbeam Levels about it. He had someone get him, I heard this from a member of his band, he had someone get him acid so he could try it like Jimi Hendrix. He hated it, and he wrote the song Moonbeam Levels. Around the time of the Love Sexy album, a woman named Ingrid Chavez was keeping him company, and she turned Prince and many other celebrities onto ecstasy. He tried that, and he got the song Alphabet Street out of it. So he tried a few things. Yeah, it's a good song. He tried a few things, but he wrote the song Pop Life, and he meant it. What's that going into your nose? Is that where all your money goes? The river of addiction flows. You think it's hot, but there will be no water when the fire blows. He really looked down on people who did drugs. And that kid's system was so clean, he'd get high off of sugar. So what we think happened is that he was in increasing pain from his hips and his knees and his ankles. When I knew him, he would never admit to being sick. He would get colds and the flu, but he would never let anyone know. He never canceled a show in the whole time I was with him. Ever. He would take Dayquil, that over-the-counter medicine. He'd just go on stage. He would just perform, and he'd act as if he weren't sick. He just didn't want anyone to know. So I think when the pain started coming, I've heard from people who were with him at the end of his life, he was taking aspirin and Tylenol. His religious beliefs prohibited him, would not allow him to get surgery. So he was taking pain medication so that he could continue to function, and he had to keep taking stronger and stronger doses. And his body was so small that it got too much for his system. But he would not, due to his religious beliefs, get the surgery that would have alleviated the pain. Because he was a really smart human being, I think he was ready to go. He was so smart that if he had wanted to hang around, he knew what the answer was. He knew how to do that. Especially because a week before he died, he had been in extremis. His plane had to make an emergency landing in Moline, Illinois. He was clinically dead, and they brought him back. He knew what bad shape he was in, and he just let it go. And that's, it was not, He was not taking pain medicine to get high. He was taking pain medicine to get through his day.
Sorry, I've got two questions. One's about pigs and one's about prints.
Yes.
I'll do the prints one because when you talk about James Brown, when he got on stage with James Brown, I've watched a lot of like guest appearances where Prince comes on stage with another band, and from another guitarist, and it seems like he gets on stage and then I would say 9 times out of 10, apart from that like magic and gift one, which is he goes to the heavens on his guitar, he just plays a punk, he just gets up there and just plays punk guitar. He plays basically the James Brown catalogue from beginning to end of the different punk groups. And to me it's amazing to witness that, in that he won't go out and blaze a solo, he just sit in there with the band and play all of the punk groups. And is that, you think that, what within his psyche was that, is that just, that's what he wanted to do, just going to sit with the band and the performances, do you think?
It's a really good question, because he had a difficult relationship with other celebrities. He had an easy relationship with fans, but he didn't know how to be a celebrity. I will answer your question a little bit more directly in a moment, but an example of that is that when he won the Academy Award for the best soundtrack for Purple Rain, he couldn't go on stage and accept it by himself. He had to bring Wendy and Lisa up there with him, because they taught him about Hollywood. They taught him how to be in Hollywood. He really wasn't comfortable with that, and that's why he lived in Minnesota for nearly all of his life. So when he would get on stage with other musicians, it would be out of character for him to show off or try to impress them. He probably knew he didn't need to impress them, but he also, my hunch is that he might have been a little bit afraid of it as well, because you get on the stage with some badass musicians, you know, I mean, they can wipe the floor with you too. So he might have been just playing it cautious. That's my hunch. You had a pig question?
Yeah, so I stopped eating pork after listening to one of your talks.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah,
I'm glad.
As soon as you said you studied the big brain,
Yes.
you know, it's like me and my wife Angie, you know,
Yes.
we both looked at each other, we can't talk.
It's a really intelligent, more intelligent than a dog.
Yeah.
And there it is, you know, with this great engine under the hood, and it's like, what the fuck? What did we do? We didn't do anything. And we don't need him.
Emotional intelligence of, you've studied, is there the emotional intelligence within a pig?
I never got to study them. I have to wait until I retire, I think, before I could do the scientific work I'd really like to do. It was my dream, but some smart people at the University of Minnesota said, your science career is going to be really short. So cognitive pathology and consciousness is one of the most difficult subjects there is to study. You might be wasting your time, and you should probably use what you already know about music and go into music cognition. And I was very disappointed. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was the right advice, and I love it now. But I still want to do that one thing. I'd really like to do that.
But you sort of have, you obviously have a feeling that there is more to learn about it.
Intelligence is an emergent property. So a brain is a mechanical thing, and the more complex it gets, as we know from artificial intelligence, as something gets more complex, there are more possibilities. So intelligence can be directly tied to neural connections. And there are a few species who have more than we have. Dolphins have more. But the pigs are right up there. So intelligence and emotions emerge from the interaction of a network of 100 billion neurons and all the possible connections. It's a number that's too big for us to really even conceive of. There are more factors at play. But anytime you have great complexity, a pig compared to a cockroach, you're going to have more intelligence. And as we know from studies on orcas and other species, oh, there's a lot of emotions there too. Emotional lives are even more primitive circuits than cognitive function. So something can be not too bright cognitively, but be deeply feeling. If you want to read a great book about that, it's the 2016 book by Franz de Waal. It's called Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? It will blow your mind. He's a great researcher. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes.
Prince was doing like 4 hours down at a show every night, recording after that, or doing another gig after that, and you know, did completed surgery. How on earth was he superhuman? His voice. How did he never lose his voice or suffer from?
I don't know. I know that he secretly took vocal lessons with Seth Riggs. He and Michael Jackson both. They didn't want that to get out. It's too late. You know, this is yeah, they did learn from experts how to protect the voice. 4 hours of sleep was a full night's sleep for him. He didn't need much. Yeah, it was, when I knew him, he was we were all in our 20s pretty much. So, you know, there's the excitement of being on top at that time. Yeah, it was great. I'd like to tell you the pie story. Yeah. Okay, so when I joined him, we started doing the movie Purple Rain, and we were shooting it in Minneapolis, and I was a new employee. I didn't know exactly what I could do to help. I brought playback tapes, I brought things, you know, to the movie set, but I wasn't as busy as I had normally been, so I had a rare night off, and I'm at home, and I thought, I think this was November, and I had joined him in August, so I'd only been there for a few months. I want to help, I want to do something, because they're on the movie set, and maybe there's something I can do, and for some reason, I thought the solution was a pie. I'd never been on a movie set before or known people who'd made movies, but I thought, I know, I'll bake him a pie. And I went to the store and I got the apples and the flour and everything I needed, and I baked an apple pie, and I'm taking the apple pie to Prince on the movie set, and I saw, you know, the bodyguards, and I showed them my identification, and I said, where is he? Oh, there's his trailer over there. And it's just as I'm walking to his trailer with the pie that I'm realizing, I wonder if this is a good idea. I didn't know. Well, maybe you don't need a pie when you make a movie. I don't know what you need. So I'm walking to his trailer with this pie, and I thought, but I'm going to commit to this idea. So I knock on the door, and he opens the door of the trailer, and he's standing there. He says, yes. I said, Prince, I made you a pie. And he said, a pie? And I said, yeah, a pie. He said, thank you. And he took the pie, and he said, wait here. He set the pie down, and he looked around in his trailer. The only thing that was there's no food there, was a little package of Tic Tacs, those little mints. And he came over with the Tic Tacs. He said, hold out your hand. And I put my hand like this. And he sprinkled some Tic Tacs into my hand, and I said, thank you. We had a very ceremonial, an exchange of gifts. And everything, and things changed after that, because he recognized, there's this resource who wants to help. If she's got free time, she'll give it to me. She wants to help, and he put me to use more after that, because he recognized, you know, and occasionally I baked cakes for him and cookies and things like that, because he had a sweet tooth and he knew I liked to bake, so occasionally he would ask me for something. It was, I like that story because it was, I don't know, some sixth sense told me that would work. And it did. I'm saying the gesture is, I want to mother you. I want to be nurturing. I want to support you because you're working really hard. And he needed that. Yeah, he needed that. Yes.
Did your study of the science of music condition increase your appreciation of music, and if so, how?
The two, both music and brain science, are so complex that it would be foolish of me to believe that I understand either one, because there's so much to know about them. learning about the brain science, music, cognition, and psychoacoustics illuminates certain aspects of music that you might not have realized before. Learning about music illuminates brain science as well. But it would be foolish to say that now that I know one, I know more about the other. There's little things, like for example, hemispheric specialization. For most people, for all right-handed people and for most left-handed people, the right side is primarily responsible for melody and pitch perception and rhythm perception, and the left hemisphere right here is more responsible for speech and language perception. So that influences panning, where you pan things. So if you've got your headphones on and you've got that guitar solo pan to the right, it's going to come in the right ear, and it crosses over here at the brainstem. So it comes in the right ear, and it's going to be heard mostly as speech. It's going to be heard as speech on the left side. You take that pan pot and you move that guitar solo over to the left, let it come in the left ear and be received here, you're going to hear the emotional subtext of that performance. Little things. And learning about those things explained why I like things panned a certain way. Well, I've always liked them panned a certain way, just because of how I like to receive music. So it's just like little things like that. They inform each other, but it's too complex to, we don't have it all figured out, that's for damn sure. Yeah.
One of the things that you've talked about a little bit over the last week is, well, I think that I've learned at least is you have a sort of grit, tenacity, and to get the job done, and the bottom line is it needs to be done, and that is so admirable. And I just wonder, not so much what you wanted it, but what was the thing that at the beginning of your career you thought, what was that, what did you wish you had learned earlier that you reflected on maybe perhaps later on? If there was anything at all, was it something you really should have known that?
Well, pretty much everything. You know, every day you learn something new. And like when I was in my 20s, I was as stupid as most 20-year-olds, you know, and in your 20s you got so many problems, and then in your 30s you're like, okay, I'm going to work on these problems now. I'm working on these problems. This is good. I'm making progress. And then in your 40s you're like, I got this. I've got these problems solved. I'm doing pretty good. And then by the time you're in your 50s, you're like, was there a problem? I really don't remember. But really, I mean, you find these stages really go. So I'm in my 60s now, and of course I sound confident and telling these stories. That's what happened. But at the time, I was as naive and as stupid as any other 20-year-old, as fearful, as full of self-doubt. What I did not have, that many of my contemporaries have, is a safety net. Many of my contemporaries can fall off that tightrope and they've got a place to land. But I grew up under, I had wonderful parents, but lower middle class. There was no chance of college for us. That wasn't going to happen. None of us were career people. My dad wanted my brothers and me to get jobs in the grocery store, because it would be the union that would protect us. That was the bar we were expected to touch. My mother passed away after a long illness when I was a teenager. So with no safety net, you're on that tightrope. You're going to stay on that tightrope. You're going to stay on that tightrope, because it's either do great things or do nothing. College wasn't an option. There were no other options, and that's one of the things that drives you. You're not going to fall if there's nowhere to fall.
I think we have time for one more question.
Just off the top of your head, can you recommend any books for someone to Google when you're talking about your planning, music, selection, right, and who you would recommend I read up on to get that emotional connection with music?
Music and emotion was the hot topic 10 years ago. And it's beastly difficult to study. Because an emotion is something, in order to be emotional, a stimulus needs a suitable receptor. So the song that moves you to tears one day, it's not going to move you to tears if you're hearing it at the wrong moment. It's not in the stimulus. You cannot write a song to be emotional because it depends on the listener. What you can learn about are those aspects of music that are known to give rise to emotions, such as unexpected chord changes. That's something you can do. Timbral manipulation, as I mentioned earlier, the low rumble, or things that evoke feelings, but there's no algorithm that predicts it. If you're interested in the topic, my advisor, Daniel Levitin, wrote the book, This Is Your Brain on Music. It became a New York Times bestseller. It introduces the layman to the topic. The other books on the topic tend to be written for scholars. But there are books out there. There's Psychology for Musicians, and a book called Sweet Anticipation by David Huron, who's a great researcher. This is a cool thing from David Huron. His wife is an anthropologist, so he goes with her out to the woods and wherever she goes to study things. They were in the rainforest in South America, and David Huron saw a habit of these people in the rainforest. All the men, all the way down to the boys who were after puberty, would wake up around between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning every day. They'd get up of a dead sleep. Their wives would have to shake them awake. They'd get up. They'd go in the center of their encampment, and all the males would sit around in a circle, and for an hour they'd sing. Then they'd go back to bed. And David Huron observed this over a number of days, and he couldn't figure out what's up with that. But he did some research, and he thinks he has a good explanation. He asked us, what's the most dangerous animal in the jungle? What? Yeah, you got it, yeah. Most people would say a jaguar or an anaconda, but the most dangerous animal in the jungle is man. The most vulnerable time for people is when they're dead asleep. And if another tribe is going to attack, they'll attack in the hour right before dawn, when you're dead asleep, and they can do all the plundering they need to do, and just as the sun is coming up and lighting their mayhem. So when men would wake up and go and sit in a circle and sing, what they're signifying to the other animals in the jungle is, we're awake and we are one. We are one voice. We're a tribe. Lessons like that are really interesting. David Huron has a theory about why we like sad songs, about the release of prolactin in our tears, and there are many good scientific explanations, but like all of the natural sciences, these are works in progress. As Richard Parncutt says, in the sciences, these kinds of sciences, all facts are temporary facts until we get better tools, and then we know a little bit better. Oh, and he also discovered that all the women all sing at noon, but he didn't know why they did that. Like when they're washing the dishes and stuff.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I really don't think that there will be a person in this room, or in fact anywhere, who doesn't leave your presence a better version of themselves. Thank you so very much for everything that you've shared with us.